Okay, just so everyone knows, to make sure it works, I am already live on YouTube.
Yay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It appears we have a quorum of all council members. Thank you for being here. We will now ask, are there any council members that would have a disclosure at this time? Raise your hand and if you think you have a disclosure. Evan Clapper.
I'd just like to disclose that I have a commercial use permit with Arches and Canyonlands National Parks.
Thank you. Anyone else have a disclosure? Okay, we are now accepting citizens to be heard.
Madam Chair, I have a.
I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. Hi, Curtis. Yes.
Yes, I would like to disclose that I own an interest in nightly accommodations in the mall.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mary,
Yes.
I should disclose my husband sells artwork with the NHA.
Thank you. Okay, see there.
Aaron's got a comment.
Aaron, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay, so I too have a nightly rental and a business on Main Street.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Okay, is that everyone? Let me see.
Hey, Karen, hey, Mary,
Yes.
would it be good to do a roll call vote so that we have for record everyone who's in attendance for this meeting?
I will, yes, I will do that now. Thank you.
Yeah.
I will go through and the Grand County Council, the members that are present are Mary McGann, Curtis Wells, Greg Halliday, Evan Clapper, and Gabriel Wojtek. Mayor Niehaus, would you tell us which members of your delegation are here?
Sure. I see Ronnie DeRessery and Kaylin Jones and Tawny Knutson Boyd and Karen Guzman Newton and myself, Mayor Emily Niehaus. I do not see Mike Duncan, but there is a phone number.
I believe that's Tori Hill. Is that Tori Hill's phone number?
8508.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
Tori Hill.
I cannot tell if Councilmember Mike Duncan is on the line.
I don't see another line. Harry Holland, could you tell us who's here from the Castle Valley?
As far as I can see, it looks like, well, Tori Hill is here, Robert O'Brien, and Pamela Gibson.
Thank you. Thank you. And representing the Park Service, could you tell us who's here for the Park Service, Casey?
Yes, I'm Casey Cook Collins. I'm the acting National Park Service Superintendent for the Southeast Utah Group. And I have with me Amy Tendick, who is our planning and compliance specialist.
Mary, I also have staff on this.
Okay. Would you
Also, we've got Carly Castle, Assistant City Manager. And I think we also have Summer Johnston.
I saw her a moment ago.
She's somewhere. Maybe she's in the waiting room.
Laurie's here too, Emily.
Oh yeah, Lori, hi. Our city attorney.
And for the county, we have Mallory Nassa is with us and Quinn Hall. And Christina Sloan. So thank you. I think that is everyone that is attending. We are at the section of citizens to be heard. If you wish to be heard, you can dial 669-900-6833. The meeting ID number is 838-3079-4315. Password 114949. Do we have anyone in the waiting room? Mallory? There does not appear to be anyone for citizens to be heard. If someone appears in the waiting room, we will allow them to give their comment after the presentation. So now we have a presentation on the phased reopening and visitor access strategies for Arches and Canyonlands National Park. Casey Cook, Acting Superintendent, National Park Service, Southeast Utah Group. Thank you, Casey.
Good morning. Thanks to everyone for inviting me for this presentation. Madam Chair, Mayor Niehaus, various council members. I'm sorry I've not gotten a chance to meet you in person. I guess this is the new way of doing business. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you about our phased adaptive recovery plan for opening up Arches National Park. Our plan actually includes Canyonlands National Park as well, but we're focusing on Arches today because in addition to some basics about the plan, I want to talk with you about a particular temporary tool that might be useful for us to include during our phased reopening of Arches, and that is a temporary timed entry system that we would like to consider. And that's it's important for us to know that you would be interested in seeing us more about that and potentially pursue that. So at this point, I'm going to share my screen.
Mike Duncan has joined the meeting from the City Council.
All right, because I'm not an expert on Zoom, I need to ask if you all can see my screen.
Yes, I can see it. Yes, Casey.
Yes.
Okay, great. We use a different method in the Park Service. We use Microsoft Teams, so this is a little new to me. But here we go. So the presentation outline, I've got four different areas that I'd like to talk to you about. The first one is to talk a bit about the adaptive recovery plan, and that's where we're going to go at this point. But to get started with that, you know, I want to talk a little bit about how we got to where we are. So as you all know, working with you and Southeast Utah Health Department, the community, local officials, the congressional delegation, we ended up closing Arches National Park and Canyonlands National Park on March 28th in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I appreciate very much the level of coordination and communication that we had getting to that point. It was a very uncertain time for all of us, and I really appreciate the way this county, the entire local community gathers around and tries to figure out a best path forward. So we closed on March 28th, and we obviously were not the only national park to close. Because of the pandemic, there were over 100 units of the National Park Service that closed as a result of that. Many of them are opening back up, and a number of them are also still closed, and a number of them small historic sites where social distancing is going to be really difficult to achieve in urban areas. That it may be quite some time before those open up. But Arches, on the other hand, reopened to visitors today. So we actually have begun phase 1 of our adaptive recovery plan just a few hours ago. And I'll give you an update in a second, but I wanted to pause briefly to talk about what was so magical about May 29th. Why is that the date that we chose to reopen Arches National Park? And I'll tell you that a part of that was being in line with the Southeast Utah Health Department's public health order that extended to this day. And in order to sort of match up with that and the governor's plan and so forth. But beyond that, there was more to it than that. And that had to do with what was going on with the National Park Service nationally and guidance that we were getting. So we were told by the Office of Public Health, or advised, I should say, not told, and our leadership that we needed to consider pushing off bringing on our seasonal staff. Normally for Arches National Park, we're bringing on people just about the time that the park's closed. So in early April and on into towards late April, we would have been bringing on dozens of seasonals to help us with operating the park during the normal busy season, which is the summer into the fall. Well, obviously we couldn't do that because there were so many places that were under stay-at-home and shelter-in-place orders. So the National Park Service asked parks to take pause and not bring people on until May 24th, which happened to be right in the middle of the Memorial Day weekend. So we weren't able to bring people on until basically last weekend, except for a few that we were able to get on early. And in addition to that, bringing them on, if they came from out of state, we have had them quarantine for 14 days that they would be able to integrate into our staff without compromising our staff safety, which is a really important aspect of what we're doing here. So that is how we arrived at today's date. And what is open at Arches and what is closed at Arches during this first phase, phase 1 of our adaptive recovery plan, it's reflected on the screen there. So basically all of our roads and trails and restrooms are now open. Commercial services are allowed to operate, so our concessions and our commercial use authorization permittees and so forth. And our day use permits for climbing and canyoneering and river. There's some things that are still closed and probably will be closed for a bit. Our visitor centers are not open. That includes the CNHA park stores. The Devil's Garden Campground is not open. Backcountry camping isn't quite ready to go yet. We're not collecting entrance fees at this point, and we should be adding some of those things in phase 2. So that's kind of where we are. I want to also pause for a second and just tell you how it went. I'm living in an apartment out at Arches National Park, and cars have been coming into the entrance road and up to the roundabout there, well, basically throughout the entire closure. But this morning and last night, there were coming in. We opened the gate at 6 o'clock this morning and allowed people to go up on into Arches National Park. And it was steady. Cars were not backed up. I wondered if we were going to end up with a big long line of folks, and we did not. Folks were coming and going. Our rangers were reminding them, we're not open yet. We're not open yet. And so when we did swing the gate, people came in a few at a time. I watched that until about 7 o'clock. And then I heard on our park radio system along about 8:30 that things were starting to get very busy in the park. We have probably 850 parking spots in the park, and they fill up often according to the geography of the park road. So the windows area often fills up first, and then people progress on to Wolf Ranch where the Delicate Arch Trail is, and then go on to Devil's Garden. Well, interestingly, Wolf Ranch is the place that filled up first today. And we ended up closing off that area to any additional parking at about 8:30 or so. And then by the time 9 o'clock came around, things were pretty much full. And so at about 10 minutes after 9 o'clock, we took the action that is often what we have to do on very busy holiday weekends. And that is that we closed the park entrance road. And we had to tell a number of people that the park would be closed for up to 3 hours, and that they could come back and see in a number of hours if they could get back in. So I tell you that because it's a salient part of the overall story that I'm going to tell here. So the adaptive recovery plan that we developed for Arches National Park and Canyonlands as well, has 3 main objectives. And those are the 3 first bullet points there. So protecting the health and safety of our staff, and our visitors, and of course, all of you as part of the local community, and Park Service folks are also part of the local community, protecting park resources, and then also providing for a safe visitor experience that's consistent with all the guidelines that we're following. So those are kind of the underpinnings of our Arches adaptive recovery plan. The 2 bullet points that are below that, they relate to the idea of extra different tools that we might want to employ temporarily in order to try to make visitor access as safe as we can, and be able to still respond to situations that may come up as we continue to see how COVID-19 progresses in our community, in our area. What we're hoping to do is if we can explore this and decide that it's tenable, we might be able to use the timed entry system to safely manage the pace and flow of visitor use, and that would reduce crowding and provide an improved visitor experience. So it might help us avoid situations like we had this morning. Rather than having everybody come in the first couple of hours of the day, we might be able to meter them in, give them an opportunity to spread out across the busiest times and go to the different places and be able to know that they could get there. So I want to talk a little bit about
Muted.
I'm sorry?
We're getting static, so I want to remind people that are not talking to be on mute.
All right, so visitation trends. You know, we think we know what happens around Arches National Park in terms of visitation in a normal year, but we're all trying to figure out if that's what's going to happen going forward. So the parts of this graph that look familiar to you are the ones that are blue and red. You know, this shows the monthly visitation at Arches from January to July, and it's got 2018, 2019, and then only a few of the bars for 2020, and that's obvious because we closed the gates at the end of March. So the only traffic we would have had at Arches National Park for April and May would have been park staff. So this time of year, we would expect to see quite a bit of congestion, looking at the red bars and the blue bars. What's gonna happen with regard to the impacts of coronavirus? How are people gonna be viewing traveling? How is that gonna impact tourism to our community, and certainly visitation at Arches National Park? So that's the big question. Typically, we know what it looks like. I'm sure you all have experienced this and have seen lots of pictures similar to the ones that are on this slide. So the iconic locations in Arches National Park get very busy very quickly. And I'm sure that's probably happening out there right now with the number of folks that are out there as well. Tourism professionals are trying to figure out, you know, how to predict what's going to happen based on what people are saying they're comfortable and uncomfortable with. This is an interesting graph, and it's from the source of it is Arrivalist, and we have a tourism specialist in our Washington office that pulled this up for us yesterday. And what this shows is that in Utah, road trips, this shows what was happening with road trips of 50 or more miles starting in February, and you know how they progressed. You could see obviously they go up on weekends, and it was busy, busy, busy until right about the time we closed the park and the shelter in place and stay-at-home orders were imposed, and everybody was staying at home for the most part. But then you look at last weekend, Memorial Day weekend, and boom, it's right back to almost the pre-pandemic change in travel plans that was happening before, right when we were going into the spring break months. And something else I wanted to note about this is that tourism professionals are also seeing that visitors are interested in road trips because they can travel in their own vehicles in which they feel safer. And the places that they want to go are open areas like national parks, beaches, and they want to engage in outdoor recreation that's not team sports. So those are all things that happen on the public lands around here, including Arches National Park. So you probably had seen in the media, as most of us were watching, what was happening as other national parks were opening up. This is a photograph that's from the media outlet, The Guardian. And I think it's from several weeks ago. It was right as Yellowstone National Park was opening up. And I think this is the viewing area for Old Faithful. And you can see that there are lots and lots of people there. It's very, very busy. And this is also kind of a repeated scene in national parks that are closer to us here. So Zion National Park, when they reopened, they don't have their shuttle running right now. And so they're allowing private vehicles to go into the scenic drive in Zion Canyon. They've been having to close that frequently because it fills up very early. Over the holiday weekend, I think the closure of the drive happened before 8 o'clock every day of the first couple days leading up to the holiday weekend, and then including the holiday weekend as well. So we're noting, as they did there, that there were lots of different states reflected in the license plates. This morning when I was at Arches, I saw, well, I didn't see, I talked to the lead ranger there, and she said that as she was letting people in, she saw license plates from New York and Illinois and California. She hadn't seen very many from Utah yet. By the time I left at 7, there were a lot more coming in from Utah and Colorado, but many other states. The superintendent at Zion National Park in the very first day reported seeing license plates from 46 different states, as well as from Canada and Mexico. So people are coming from all over. They're coming to enjoy outdoor recreation in places like the national parks. And so I think we can probably expect to see that here as well. So the challenge becomes, how do we facilitate visitation so that visitors can have a reasonable opportunity to follow health guidelines, and still we are able to ensure the safety of our local community and our staff. And that's where the concept of a temporary timed entry system option comes in. So let's talk a little bit about that. This would be one of the biggest tools that we could add to our toolbox to accomplish increased access while balancing the human safety pertaining to COVID-19. So the National Park Service, the agency-wide adaptive operations recovery plan that the Arches plan is based on, came out not that long ago. It came out on May 19th, and it had some really good general guidance to help parks figure out how to move forward in providing public access to the national parks and places that had closed. Of course, a big guiding principle would be supporting visitation while making sure that public health and safety, which of course includes employees and communities, was safeguarded as well. And so timed entry showed up in that operations recovery plan as a tool that was listed. And in our case, we would like to consider it as a potential temporary tool to support increasing access to the park while providing people with a reasonable opportunity to comply with the public health guidelines around COVID-19. And those, we all know what they are: social distancing, et cetera. So a little bit about how timed entry would work. Again, for us, it would be temporary and probably be associated with phase 2 of our adaptive recovery plan for Arches. The reason that it would be attractive is that it would manage the pace and flow of visitor use of the course of the day. And that's different than what happened this morning at Arches, with us having to close the entrance gate at a few minutes after 9 o'clock. This would give people a better sense for being able to get into and to see the things that they would want to see during particular times of the day. So the way these systems work, the National Park Service has been using recreation.gov, we often call it rec.gov, for online tour tickets. So there are places like cave sites, actually not just the Park Service, but there are a lot of entities that use recreation.gov. Visitors would go online or be able to use their smartphones, go to recreation.gov and create an account and be able to get their timed entry permits. And there are a couple of different, I guess, ways to do this in terms of planning. You know, some people plan in advance. They know what they want to do and they can make plans 1 to 3 months in advance. And so a number of permits would be available, set aside for those folks that are able to plan that far in advance. But there would be a number that would be set aside for those that are more spontaneous in figuring out what their travel plans are. So 2 days in advance, for example. And further within that system, the park would figure out what arrival time slots would make sense. So, you know, at Arches, we know when we're the most busy. And so perhaps we would be looking at similar arrival time slots for peak times of the day, like is shown on the slide. So maybe 8 to 10, 10 to 12. It seems to me like 11 to, well, basically 9 to 11 or 12 is when we're super busy. And Amy can probably correct me during the question session if I'm incorrect on that. So what this would mean is that visitors wouldn't have to show up at 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock. They could show up having one of these timed entry permits anytime within that window and be able to go in and enjoy the park. They wouldn't have to come out at a particular time. It's only metered going in. So they could be in there all day. They could be in there just a short time and come back out again. And this is an attractive thing because it would improve the visitor experience, because they would have, it would be a more sure thing that people wouldn't risk the fact that they might have the gate closed as they're getting close to the entrance station. They're all excited to go in, and then the park, all of the parking spaces in the park are full. This would sort of spread it out in a way that would help visitors also be more safe, and they wouldn't all be crowded at the same iconic locations. Now, this would require a lot of communication on the part of the Park Service to make sure that visitors and community members understand how it works and how it would play out. In terms of what it would cost, right now, systems that are similar to what we might be looking at are about $2, but it's not added onto the 7-day entrance fee. It's rolled into that. So that means that the park would actually retain somewhat less of the entrance fee, because the $2 would be covering the cost of the timed entry system that would be managed by recreation.gov. And it's a familiar system. Perhaps you all have used it to book campgrounds on public lands, maybe cave tours. It's quite a popular system. And I know that in your packets, you saw that Rocky Mountain National Park is implementing a system through recreation.gov. They just opened their park several days ago, and they actually went live with their recreation.gov timed entry tickets, I think just a couple days ago. And it's very adaptable. So we've heard from recreation.gov in an initial conversation we had with them that there's a lot of changes. It's very scalable, and there are a lot of changes that parks can make to get it right. So the benefits are that a temporary timed entry system would be proactive. We would actually be managing up front rather than reacting in terms of closing a gate when things just get too full. It reduces the potential for crowding. It would keep our employees safe from, from having to interact at close range with crowds at some of the iconic destinations. It would make it easier for our maintenance staff to know that they can get to the vault toilets that are all along the points of interest up there at times where they won't be thronged with people. It would assist with that. It'd be predictable, as I mentioned. Visitors can do this in advance, although you know, they wouldn't have to do it months in advance because of the way the tickets are partitioned. And obviously, it would be done in coordination with the local community, which is why I've brought this presentation to you today to get your thoughts about that. And then it's flexible. Like I said, it can be tweaked to react to changing conditions. So what happens next then? And for that, that's sort of why we're here meeting today, to determine interest among the stakeholders. You all are going to probably have some questions and some discussion. And if it looks like it would be of interest and value to the community, we would be looking for you to tell us that so that we could then move to having a more detailed conversation with recreation.gov and figuring out whether we could make this work on a fairly quick timetable. And what we've heard is that recreation.gov can stand up a timed entry system in a matter of weeks, maybe between 3 and 6. They're actually putting together some packages that are almost like off-the-shelf systems, because there are many other national parks that are interested in looking at something like this. So it wouldn't be starting from scratch. They've already got systems like they're using at Rocky Mountain and other places. So we would be able to, if we decided to move forward and got the support from that, for that from you all and from other stakeholders and our leadership, then we would probably be able to do this maybe in July. And then we obviously would want to come back around and talk to you all again and to let you know what we found out about trying to implement a program like this. So all of this is about safety, as was with the closure of the national parks. We were doing it to make sure that our community would remain safe, and that our employees, the public, that everyone remains safe. And that's obviously what we're really focused on as we open up the parks again too. We really want to make sure that the experience for visitors who are coming here, maybe it's the trip of a lifetime, or maybe folks who like to come every other weekend from places that aren't far away, that they're able to feel comfortable and confident. They know that they're going to be able to get in. They know that they're not going to be in large crowds of people where there may be concerns about COVID-19 spread. And we also would hope that this would help keep us from having to look at another sort of park closure, or to really pull back on the services and access that we're trying to move forward to provide. So we don't want to have to take big steps backward if there ends up being some sort of a surge in COVID-19 cases here. So that is what we're wondering about, is what sort of thoughts you would have and questions you would have about us exploring the temporary timed entry system for Arches National Park. And so with that, I'll see if you all have questions.
Thank you very much, Casey. We do have two people online. Phone number 7525. Do you have a question or comment? Casey, do you want to put down your screen? Thank you. The first one's 7525.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Doug McMurdo from the Times Independent. I do not have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Doug. 5263. Do you have a question or comment? Yes, 5263. They're muted, so.
I'm just listening in.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now I will move to council members. Does anyone have a question? Tawny. You're muted, Tawny.
Sorry about that. I have a couple of quick questions. I think I can ask them both, and Casey can answer them both together. First, will there be a time limit for people that, is there a time limit during the day that you would have to come out of the park? And then also, can visitors get permits for, say, several days in a row or for a week? And then will there be any kind of limitation on the number of times that, say, locals or people that come often would be limited to in a year or in a season?
Well, in terms of would they come out at a particular time? No, it's really just setting up to control when people come in. Most people, according to Amy and folks on the staff here, tend to stay 5 or 6 hours. But folks like to come back and do stargazing and things like that at night. We're not going to be closing the gate at night. So we would be looking at trying to spread things out during those really busy times when people all want to come in at once. But they'd be able to come out at their leisure, and people would be able to come and go after the hours that we would be trying to control the volume. So there's really, there's a lot of flexibility. I mean, things were busy at the gate this morning, partly because people wanted to get up there and see sunrise. Because normally, the gates are open and people can go up early and they can stay late and enjoy, a moonlight hike, etc. With regard to some of the detailed questions that you asked about would people be limited? Well, let's say if you buy a 7-day entrance pass, and that's a question I have too. And so I guess maybe I should precede what I'm going to say by saying that there are a lot of details that we haven't worked out yet. But if you have a 7-day pass, would you have to have a timed entry ticket for every day that you wanted to go in between 10 and noon? I don't know the answer to that yet. That's for when we get into the weeds with recreation.gov. But again, since there's access after hours, then people do have a lot of flexibility outside of just the time that they might want to go in for their hike to Arch if they want to do that between 8 and 10.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Yes,
Madam
Harry?
Chair,
Yes. Harry?
Thank you, Mary. I'm just curious, so you talked about this as being a temporary tool. I mean, are you looking at just having this implemented during COVID? I mean, is this, when you say temporary, how long are you projecting? That's one question. And then the other real concern that I have is this, what's the percentage that you're going to allow for last minute reservations? Because I mean, that there's quite a few people who come here, and I mean, how, you know, the other presentations with Rocky Mountain National Park and with Yosemite, you know, they showed the percentages that they're, you know, trying to cut visitation down. And I don't know if I heard what Arches National Park's goals are. Is it 50%, 30%? And then, you know, again, just that concern of, you know, people coming here, this is, you know, the reason why they do come. And if you're looking at, you know, 2 to 3 weeks for implementation, and is that, again, that, you know, when would this be, I guess, how many locals would be able to make a reservation for that day? And then just considering I run a business, I'm just curious, how long are you planning on not charging for going into Arches National Park? That seems not the, I mean, we always hear that the parks are limited in funding, and then you're offering free entrances. What's the reasoning for that?
Those are great questions. So let me take the entrance fee one first. We will be reinstituting our entrance fees probably in just 10 days or so. Part of the reason why we're not doing that as a phase 1 activity is that the transactional nature of entrance fees, as it has worked at Arches in the past, is that there's a lot of stuff being passed back and forth between the fee collectors in the booth and the people in their vehicles or on motorcycles or whatever. So money going back and forth, credit cards being passed back and forth. So there are a lot of touch points, and we're trying to eliminate that as much as we can for safety. So we're expecting to go cashless. We're going to try to do more online pass sales and have the kinds of equipment at our fee booths where they're not being passed back and forth between people. So that's why we haven't included it. We really expect to have entrance fees charged again fairly soon. As to the question about how long the temporary timed entry system would be in effect, it is exclusively focused on being part of our COVID-19 recovery. So we aren't sure how long that's going to be an issue, whether we would have a surge in cases that might take down staff and make them ill and create capacity issues for us, for the community, for really everyone, visitors who come in. So we don't have a particular end time for that. But I think when we feel that operations, services, facilities are more or less back to normal or close to normal, whatever that will be, then we would not be using that system anymore. It's to kind of get us through this uncertain period where we're really not sure what's going to happen and how people are going to react and what their comfort level is with coming and being in groups folks that pass each other on trails and so forth. The percentage for last minute visitors, that's all part of conversations that we'll have with recreation.gov. So your point is well taken. We know that there's an interest in spur of the moment kinds of visitation, and we'll be feeding that into our conversations with recreation.gov.
And then I'm sorry,
Colin?
Casey. So,
Harry?
and then what was the percentage that you are trying to,
Don't know
reach
yet.
for the park?
Don't know yet. So we're going to be working on that. That's another thing that will probably come out in conversations with rec.gov and internal conversations with the staff here.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, Harry, Holland?
Yeah, I've just got a couple of comments. I think that this system, the timed entry system, sounds like a good experiment to go through to maybe relieve some of the problems in the park in general. So I think that's one comment I've got. Also, how are you going to advertise this to the public so that people don't show up at the gate expecting to get in and you have conflict there at the gate? Those are
right. Well, that will require a full assault in terms of public information. And so we have, if this is something that we decide to pursue, we will have a lot of assistance from our regional office, and we will be looking to make sure that that the word gets out. But also there are great partners like the Moab Travel Council and many others that can help spread the word on this for us. So we would be looking for all of our partners to help us get the word out so that we didn't end up with lots of disappointed people once they got here. But again, remember, we're talking about a particular time of the day that we would be trying to control access. So there would be other times of the day that people could go in without having to have the timed entry ticket.
Curtis?
Thank you. Ms. Cook, to Mr. Holland's point, he raised a question, or I guess offered a comment that this is a good opportunity to experiment, with a system that can mitigate what he referred to as other, issues inside the park. And I didn't get that, hear that answer to that question. Or, this is being pitched as and presented for public safety, park service, employee safety. But do you concur with that point, that this is an opportunity to experiment with a system to mitigate, other issues with inside the park? Is that an interest of the Park Service with this proposal?
Well, that's not the motivation. We're doing this specifically as a response with regard to public and employee safety. I think that we see how it works, and that might tell us something for what we would want to do in the future. But there is absolutely no intended connection between what we would be doing with this temporary system and other plans moving forward. We don't have a current planning effort underway that this would automatically feed into. We are viewing this as a completely separate and discrete system. The lessons may be applicable. I mean, I think anything that gets tried, you do after action and you figure out what worked and what didn't, but there's not any intent for this to become a de facto visitor access management system. It's not like we're doing this to try it out now as a focus for looking at something in the future. This is something that other parks are trying as a response to COVID-19, and that is our interest in it as well.
Thank you.
Any other Michael Duncan?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Casey, I had just joined council a couple of years ago when your predecessor at Arches was proposing a reservation system. We at City Council supported that because we're trying to basically to extend the recreation season out longer through the season, mitigate congestion on some of the worst sort of days. It strikes me much of what you've described is what had been proposed at that time, albeit with lower thresholds and so forth. So even though you've asserted that this doesn't really have any connection to that kind of thing, I would suggest that you do so, consider that. And my second related comment, I guess, is that I told your predecessor that the reservation system was fine by me as long as it was done well, which means, I mean, I did a lot of computer work in my life, and I know how easy it is to write sloppy code that can be a real mess. So how far along, how much trouble are you guys going to have to invent this from scratch, or is the recreation.gov site basically already got all the algorithms in place that you need to implement your timed reservation system? Because I would rather not do it if it doesn't work.
We haven't had a lot of conversations with them. We've just had a couple. We had one yesterday. It was just a beginning conversation, but what they've done, because there is so much interest among other national parks to do this as a COVID-19 response. I mean, Rocky Mountain National Park kind of trailblazed for a number of us in talking with and working with rec.gov to get some of the, I guess, the bugs worked out there. So it's not necessarily that we would automatically use the Rocky Mountain one, but they are putting together, rec.gov is kind of putting together some almost off the shelf systems like this that parks can use. We can't choose a lot of different things because there's not a lot of time, but they're putting together things that should be pretty scalable for units that want to use them. We have to provide information about what it is we're looking for. There'll be, if it looks like the community and stakeholders are interested in us having more conversations with rec.gov, then that's what we'll be doing next week, learning more about it, and then making an internal determination as well as to whether or not we think we can support it, because we too want to make sure that it's not going to cause more trouble than we're trying to use it to solve.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments?
Mary?
Jaylyn, then Evan.
Thanks, Mary. I guess my question would be, from looking at the stats of the very small B&B that I own and run, visitation drops off dramatically in July and August. And that's about when you said that this plan might be able to go into place for July. I do know, beginning of July, I do know that you did talk about mitigating for certain times of the day when it's the most crowded. Do those same crowded conditions exist in July and August?
Well, that's what we don't know. I mean, I think if we were looking at well, I don't even know what's a normal year, but I think this is also getting at uncertainty around what COVID-19 has done to people's comfort level with different kinds of vacations and travel. I think we already see that people they want to do road trips. They want to get out and they want to go places where they can feel safe in their cars and have more control over their circumstances. And just based on the surges in visitation that parks that have opened ahead of us are seeing, I'm thinking that there could be quite a lot of visitation above what we might normally see or would have seen in years past. So that's what we'll have to kind of watch for. But then in looking at the stats for Arches, it appears that September and October are pretty busy too. So again, looking at this against what's going on with COVID and being able to make decisions around that are flexible. So that's the other part of this. We're trying to be as flexible as we can so that we're prepared to try to manage what might happen with visitor convenience in mind, with visitor safety in mind, staff safety in mind, and being as nimble as we can to change things.
Evan? Evan?
So just to be clear, the Park Service isn't asking us whether you should be limiting numbers or not. The Park Service has already decided that because of the pandemic, that there's going to be less people in the park. And so really the question is the mechanism of how to regulate that. And so one option is to drop the gate and have people lined up in the desert in no shade, queuing up for potentially 3 hours, waiting for the gate to open, backing up onto Highway 191, or having some sort of reservation system. And I think that there's a lot of voice in the community that opposes limiting the number of visitors into the park, but that's not the question that we're discussing today. It's really about the mechanism of how to limit that. And I hear you saying that if you show up early, you can still go into the park, and before the timed entry goes into effect, you'd be able to enter the park. So if you were a local in the know, you just get up and go earlier. And it seems like with the images we've seen of Yosemite and people backed up and parked on the side of the road, that's not really an experience that we want people in Moab to have. I just came from a meeting previous to this that's dealing with congestion, and we don't want to add that feeling of congestion to our prized gem here of arches. So at this point, it does have my support. My question is, if those daily limits weren't maxed out, would you be able to get a pass at the gate, or would that be something that you'd still have to go through rec.gov?
I don't know the answer to that question. So that is something that we'll have to figure out. Yeah.
And then another question, obviously a big pressure for us to open up our town and our community has been as economic drivers. So if we're asking our community to take this risk of inviting the world to come visit, has there been any discussions around commercial access to those permits? I.e., if the privates are maxed out, would there be an option for local businesses to still guide people within the park?
So you mean folks that existing permit holders, commercial use authorization folks, you're asking if they would be subject to the time entry?
Correct.
Again, we haven't gotten into the weeds on that, but my sense is that the numbers of CUA holders and concession permittees here is low enough that we would not need for them to be subject to that. So they would be going in by virtue of their permit or license and would not be subject to the timed entry system. I'm not saying that's an absolute, but in talking with Amy and other folks here at the staff, I think we would not need to regulate the commercial businesses that are permitted to come and go from arches and have this be on top of that. I think we're already good with what we have.
Great. I would recommend that if there's some opinion that differs to that rather than allowing all 600 CUA folks have access, that you could prioritize people from the 84532 zip code to have that, rather than companies out of California running dozens of folks through.
Point taken.
Thank you. Evan, do we have any other questions or comments? Yes, Ronnie, you're muted.
I'm just going to say I've noticed Kaylin's hand up for a while, so if he wants to go first, but just go to Kaylin after me. Just really quickly, because people have asked me, I mean, I think Arches is more visible to people, but was this considered at all for Canyonlands? Just to answer that question for some folks who've been asking me. And then, so I read the stuff from Yosemite as well. And do we know, are they just on a timeline to get to this? And did Rocky happen to be the first one? And are there many other parks considering this? And last question, just out of curiosity for our local workers, is the park in good shape? Does your staff have adequate PPE?
They're in pretty good shape. You know, we get concerned about our search and rescue folks. It's going to be a hot weekend, and we fully expect that we're going to have some SARS and, you know, emergency response. And we're constantly checking on our PPE stash. So we're okay to start with. If we need help, we will reach out and ask for that in terms of PPE, but we're in pretty good shape. But we are concerned about exposing our it's a big staff compared to where I come from in Flagstaff, Arizona, but it's still, you know, the number of people that do emergency medical services on the Park Service staff is not big. And if a number of them fell ill with COVID-19, we would have a big problem. So, that is a good point. Thank you for asking, by the way. Canyonlands it's not really under consideration for this. We don't have nearly as much information about when people show up, and kind of, we know that there are iconic places there that get busy too. And a lot of times when Arches gets full and we close the gate, that's where people go. Island in the Sky in particular, because it's so close here, the crowds bump over there. And so I haven't heard, because I've had my park radio off, but when we close the gates at Arches at 10 minutes after 9, I would imagine that group of cars that was waiting to get into Arches might have just gone on up to Island in the Sky. Earlier, when we checked with Island in the Sky, they were fairly slow. They were not having a lot of people coming in all at once. And the Needles District, it was steady, but they were not overwhelmed at that point. So it'll be interesting at the end of the day to see kind of how it all played out. And I think you had another question in there that I have forgotten.
Oh, that's okay. I was just wondering if, Yosemite, since we saw their presentation in our packet, if they might just be behind on the timeline. And then I had one other tiny question I want to tag in, but I want to cut Caitlin off. And that was just, I can imagine that as we discuss timelines, you guys can anticipate now your busy times of day, but I would kind of imagine it's possible that those times might shift. Like as it gets hotter, all of a sudden people might be trying to get in earlier, and you guys might find that you need to shift some of that. I take it.
Well, potentially, but we need to have, there will be a scanning, there will be a checking system as people come up to the entrance station. So what we don't want to do is extend our workday for our fee collection folks by a whole bunch, because they have to scan the barcode on the timed entry ticket. So we probably, that's when people just go in earlier, and then, they're not subject to the time ticket entry. Now, but we would be watching for that. We would be keeping all kinds of stats on that. And I forgot the other question you asked.
Just about Yosemite and other parks.
Oh, okay. Yosemite, I think they're waiting for the final approval from the Washington office and the Department of the Interior, but they've got their system in place, ready to go at such point that is granted for them, which I think it might have been, I may be a couple days late on this. Their system is a little bit different though. It's not timed entry, it's ticketed entry. So their issue isn't time of day. Their issue is just overall numbers of people. So they're using rec.gov, but it's a different system. But that just goes to show that recreation.gov can figure out a number of different kinds of things that parks might be looking for. And with regard to other parks that might be looking at this, I think they're doing what we're doing. They're talking to rec.gov and they're talking with their staffs. I don't want to get out ahead of any other park superintendents if they decide that they don't want to do it. So I wouldn't want to mention any other parks at this time.
Okay, yeah, thanks. And thanks for clarifying the difference between timed and ticketed.
Mm-hmm.
Kaylin?
Thank you. So it seems like some of this commercial situations may offer, as I understand it, more ripe situations for COVID transmission than the typical Arch's private outdoor experience. And I'm wondering if Arches specifically or the Park Service in general will be monitoring that, have any additional measures, or are you relying on local health departments or the industry to establish those standards? And I have more questions, but I'll let you answer them one at a time. So you don't
Thank you. Thank you. So our commercial use authorization and concession permit holders have been providing us with mitigation plans. So they have been telling us how they plan to keep visitors safe, because there are agents in terms of a visitor experience. So we have an important stake in knowing that they're going to care for our visitors well. And so we don't have a thumbs up or thumbs down per se over their mitigation plans. They submit them, we look over them, we give them feedback. We have a safety manager on our staff, and he's been looking through those. But there's a certain amount of responsibility that business owners need to take, and they take on the risk if they, excuse me, if they are not adhering to those kinds of protocols. And goodness forbid if somebody fell ill that had been on one of their trips and was able to trace it back to their particular trip with that commercial operator. So it's in the commercial operator's best interest to pay close attention to what all of the CDC and other guidance is. So we're not I guess controlling everything they're doing, but we are encouraging and looking at what they've told us they're going to do and hold them to that.
Thank you. And then you and I had met with, shortly before the pandemic about the sort of planning process that was getting rolling for Arch's congestion and visitor experience management. And there was a number of studies that were going to be happening to provide data that would feed into that. So hopefully there could be a great plan that really did its job in a successful and nuanced way and had local support and met the park's needs. Are those going to be continuing with this adaptive management? Are you waiting for full reopening to implement those, or what's the status of those?
Well, this is where I'm going to invite Amy Tendick to unmute and tell us a little bit about progress of the studies that we have going on that will inform the pre-planning effort that's not attached to this. So Amy, I think you're on.
Yeah. One of our studies, the data collection was done actually last year around Labor Day, and we are expecting the draft report of that here shortly. So that one has not been affected at all by the COVID-19 pandemic. An additional study that we are doing is mostly just data crunching for looking at a mandatory shuttle. That one has also not been impacted. And we also have some draft results of that available. Expecting final reports from both of those studies towards the end of the summer that would be available to the public. We did have a contract for a Bluetooth study that has been postponed because we wanted to make sure that it was getting an accurate picture of visitation and arches, and just not sure how accurate that might be right now. So that's been postponed at least until the fall, maybe longer. And the other data collection effort that we're undertaking is additional visitor use surveys. That data collection wasn't going to begin until this winter. And so far, I think we're still on track to begin that in November or December.
Thanks. That's all I had, Mary.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Emily?
I had a couple comments and considerations. Casey, thank you so much for the specifics to the plan that you presented. I think that specifics are super important, especially when we're asked to support, what's being proposed. So that was a great presentation, and I'm very grateful for it. So thank you. For anybody that hasn't used recreation.gov, it is a very good online reservation system. I use it all the time when I go boating. or if my family and I are going camping somewhere, we use rec.gov when we reserve a campsite down in Zion. And it's a very good system. And I'll say in particular, if we're worried about how tweakable it is, if it's, if the NPS can, because we always wonder if government's going to be a snail, that rec.gov is also used for certain voting lottery systems. So when you put in for the lottery and then they tell you whether or not you got your permit. And so I would, feel confident saying that rec.gov is a great platform to use for this temporary timed entry system. And I was just going to say a couple other things. I am very surprised that we were so full by 9:10 this morning. And I do think that we're going to have a lot more domestic travel visitation. And I think that families that have been cooped up in their home or their apartment on the Wasatch Front are going to think in July, like, I don't care if Moab's 100 degrees. I'm going to sit in my hotel room, work from there. My kids are going to swim in the pool and we're going to, go to Arches and hit the sunrise and the sunset. I think we're going to see visitation, higher visitation through this summer. At least that's my prediction. So I am grateful that we're talking about a timed entry system because of that. Because otherwise it's closed, like you were saying, Casey. With respect to what you were saying, Evan, I totally agree. Like having CUAs managed in a way that gives, shuttles priority to really directly mitigate that congestion during those times would be great. And I would love, this is not for the Park Service, but a challenge to our private sector to really consider putting together a tour that would then work with the Park Service to have a specific time that they enter. And then maybe the Park Service can respond and say, all right, well, we're really grateful for this private sector shuttle system and prioritize parking at key places for those businesses that get that CUA. That's very encouraging to me. And then I just also want to say that we are going to see a loss of our international travelers, unfortunately, this year. And that's, I think going to hopefully be made up by domestic travel. But as we move forward, that was a comment that was made very loud and clear when we talked about any kind of way in which we organize visitors in Arches, and that I just think that we always need to be thoughtful of our international travelers. And so if this is just a temporary system, maybe that's a moot point. But if we see this continue, that it's critical that we really work with those, booking agents that commented, have made comments prior to make sure that if the goal is, true access, that we make sure that we have access for those visitors as well. But Casey, thanks again for the specifics of the plan. It's super helpful so that we can make a really informed decision.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any further comments? Discussions? Okay, we will move into the action portion of our agenda. Castle Valley, your mayor is not here with us today. Is there a council member who would like to act as the mayor of Castle Valley to conduct your vote?
This is Tori Hill. I'm the first in line as acting mayor.
Okay, Tori, do you want to take over as the chair of your council and ask for a motion?
Yes, thank you, Mary. Do I have a motion? We're approving the letter.
Yes, and there is a proposed action in the packet on the agenda summary under recommendation.
Does Tori have a member that would like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion. Can you tell me again what the motion actually is? I don't have the agenda in front of me.
The proposed motion is I move to approve the joint letter of support for the National Park Services Visitor Access Strategy for Arches and Canyonlands National Parks.
Okay, I'll move to approve the letter to the National Park Service supporting the actions in the national park. Close enough?
You know, I've actually got it in front of me. This is Bob O'Brien. Should I just go ahead and do it?
Yeah.
Please, Bob.
Yeah, I move that we approve the Grand County, the Town of Castle Valley, and Moab joint letter of support for the National Park Service's Visitor Access Strategy for Arches and Canyonlands National Parks, including the phased reopening plan and temporary timed entry system for arches.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, I'm going to call your name for a vote. We'll start with you, Harry. All in favor?
Aye.
Bob O'Brien?
Aye.
Pamela Gibson?
Aye.
And Tori Hill, aye. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Unanimous.
Thank you, Castle Valley. Mayor Niehaus, would you like to have, do a vote with your council?
Sure. Is there a motion? Ronnie?
I move to approve the joint letter of support for the National Park Service's Visitor Access Strategy for Arches and Canyonlands National Parks.
Thank you, Ronnie. Is there a second?
I will second.
Thank you, Mike. And I will call for a roll call vote. If you give me just 1 second. Ronnie.
Aye.
Tawny.
Aye.
Karen. Karen.
Sorry, it was on mute. Nay.
Mike.
Aye.
Kaylin.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1.
I will entertain a motion. Who would like to make a motion?
Mary, I can make a motion on that.
Okay, Greg?
Yes, I move to approve the joint letter of support for the National Park Service's Visitor Access Strategy for Arches and Canyonlands National Parks.
Motion by Greg Halliday. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Evan Clapper. I will have a roll call vote. Greg Halliday?
Aye.
Curtis Wells?
Nay.
Gabriel Wojtek?
Aye.
Evan Clapper?
Yes.
Jaylynn Hawks?
Yes.
Mary McGann? Yes. The motion passes 5-1. Curtis Wells in opposition. So we will send you the letter of support. Casey Cook, do we have any further future considerations? Seeing none, we have completed our agenda, so I will draw this special meeting, joint meeting to a close. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.